The perfect Saturday morning has a certain sound. It's not silence. Silence is for weirdos and people who live in underground bunkers. No, the perfect Saturday morning sounds like the gentle whir of the coffee maker, the distant, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a neighbor jogging past, and the soft, contented sigh of a beagle dreaming of chasing squirrels he will absolutely never catch. That was my morning. My name is Alex. I'm a graphic designer who works from the quiet comfort of my own home, and that dreaming beagle is Buster. Life, by all reasonable measures, was good. I was stirring a splash of cream into my coffee, watching Buster's paws twitch in his sleep, when a new sound intruded. It was the distinct, slightly menacing crunch of heavy-soled shoes on my gravel walkway. It was too early for package deliveries, and too late for the newspaper. I peered through the blinds. It was the mailman, a man who usually just shoves everything in the box and moves on. But today he was walking right up to my front door, and he was carrying a single beige envelope. "See this, Buster?" I whispered, even though he was still lost in his dream world. "This isn't a Christmas card. No one sends joy via certified mail. This is pure, unadulterated trouble in a manila envelope." A sharp rap on the door confirmed my suspicions. I sighed, hauled myself up, and opened it. The mailman gave me a look of practiced neutrality, handed me the clipboard, and pointed. "Sign here." I scrawled my name, a sense of dread pooling in my stomach. He handed me the envelope and was gone before I could even ask him how his day was going. Probably for the best. He didn't need my bad juju. I closed the door and stared at the return address. Harmony Meadows Homeowners Association. Oh, fantastic. It was from the Fun Police. I ripped it open, my initial dread quickly turning to baffled indignation. The letter was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate speak, probably written by someone who gets a thrill from using words like henceforth and heretofore. It got straight to the point, if you could call a winding path through bureaucratic nonsense. Straight. Dear Mr. Thompson, it has come to the attention of the Harmony Meadows Architectural Review Committee that a new perimeter barrier has been erected at your property, 124 Primrose Lane. While we applaud your proactive approach to property enhancement, we must unfortunately inform you that the structure is in direct violation of the Harmony Meadows covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I stopped reading and looked out the window at my fence. My beautiful, brand-new, white picket fence. I'd spent a month planning it. It was classic, charming, the kind of fence you see in movies about happy families. It was the physical embodiment of the American dream. If the American dream was about keeping your beagle from running into the street, what could possibly be wrong with it? I continued reading. Specifically, the installation is in violation of Bylaw 7, Section C, subsection IV, which states that all fencing must be of a continuous, opaque, and earth-toned nature. I read that line 3 times. Continuous, opaque, earth-toned? What in the ever-loving heck did that mean? My fence had pickets. Pickets, by definition, have gaps between them. That was the whole point, and it was white. A classic, clean, beautiful white. Not earth-toned. Were they expecting me to build a wall out of mud and paint it dirt-colored? The letter was signed at the bottom, in a tight, precise cursive. Karen Swanson, President, Harmony Meadows HOA. Karen. Of course. A memory bubbled to the surface, one I had tried very hard to suppress. About a month after I moved in, I was mowing my lawn when a woman with a severe blonde bob and the intense stare of a hawk watching a field mouse marched onto my property. She wasn't holding a welcome basket. She was holding a tape measure. Without a word of introduction, she knelt, measured a patch of my grass, and stood up. "Your lawn is 3¼ inches high," she had announced, as if she were a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. Bylaw 12, Section A clearly states that turf height is not to exceed 3 inches. You have 48 hours to rectify. Then she turned and marched away. That was Karen. I had rectified, of course. I wasn't a monster. But the incident had left a bad taste in my mouth. A very, very bad taste. The letter concluded with the kind of soulless ultimatum that only a true bureaucrat could write. I had 14 days to submit a detailed plan for a compliant barrier to the committee for approval. After approval, I would have 30 days to complete its construction. Failure to comply would result in a daily fine of $50, retroactive to the date of this notice. $50 a day for a white picket fence. I sank onto my couch, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. Buster, finally awake, trotted over and nudged my hand with his wet nose, whining softly as if he could sense my distress. I looked from his concerned brown eyes out to the fence, its cheerful white pickets practically mocking me in the morning sun. It was perfect. It was exactly what I wanted. And now this woman, this tyrant of turf height, was telling me to tear it down because it wasn't opaque enough. Continuous, opaque, and earth-toned? I said out loud, the words feeling absurd on my tongue. What did they want, Buster? A slab of the Grand Canyon? A retaining wall from a federal prison? He just tilted his head. He didn't have the answers. But as I sat there, stewing in a potent cocktail of frustration and disbelief, a tiny, rebellious spark began to smolder in the back of my mind. They wanted compliance? Fine. But they had no idea just how compliant I was about to be. Before launching a full-scale suburban revolution, I figured I should at least try the diplomatic route. I'm a reasonable guy. I believe that most problems can be solved with a calm conversation and a little bit of mutual understanding. It's a lovely, optimistic worldview that my encounter with Karen Swanson was about to shatter into a million tiny, earth-toned pieces. My first attempt was a phone call. I found her number on the HOA website, took a deep, calming breath, and dialed. She answered on the second ring with a clipped, "This is Karen." No hello, no pleasantries. Just the verbal equivalent of a slammed door. "Hi, Karen. It's Alex Thompson from 124 Primrose Lane," I began, injecting as much cheerful neighborliness into my voice as I could muster. "I'm just calling about the letter I received regarding my fence. I think there might have been a small misunderstanding." "There are no misunderstandings, Mr. Thompson," she cut in, her voice cold and flat. "There is only compliance and non-compliance. Your structure is the latter." "Right, well, about that," I pressed on. "The bylaw mentions continuous, opaque, and earth-toned." I was hoping for some clarification. I mean, it's a white picket fence. It's the most American thing ever. It's like apple pie, but for yards. There was a pause on the other end of the line. For a fleeting, beautiful moment, I thought my folksy charm might have worked. I was wrong. "Apple pie," she stated, as if I had just suggested building a fence out of live scorpions, "is not an approved fencing material, Mr. Thompson. The bylaws are the bylaws. They were written to protect the aesthetic harmony and property values of our community. Your fence, with its gaps, creates visual disruption." Visual disruption? Was she serious? "They're not gaps, they're pickets. It's a style." "It is a non-compliant style," she said, her voice dropping to a low, ominous tone. "You have 13 days left to submit a new plan." Click. She hung up. I stared at my phone, dumbfounded. Okay, so diplomacy over the phone was a bust. Time for attempt #2, the email chain. I figured if I put everything in writing, with pictures and logical arguments, she'd have to see reason. I spent an hour composing a polite, well-reasoned email. I explained that the term earth-toned was subjective. I attached photos of charming high-end neighborhoods across the country that proudly featured white picket fences. I even found a loophole, a clause in the bylaws that allowed for traditional and historically significant architectural styles, and I argued that the picket fence was exactly that. I hit end feeling confident, a modern-day legal eagle fighting for landscape justice. Her reply came in 6 minutes. 6. It was as if she was just sitting at her computer, waiting for someone to challenge her authority. Mr. Thompson, subjective is a term used to excuse non-compliance. Find attached the approved palette of earth tones for Harmony Meadows. Attachment, chem_approved_colors.pdf. Furthermore, historically significant does not apply to perimeter barriers installed after the community's founding date. This matter is not open for debate. Please submit your new plan in a timely manner. Regards, Karen Swanson, President, Harmony Meadows HOA. She had CC'd the entire HOA board. The attached PDF was a single page featuring 5 shades of beige, 2 shades of brown, and a color that could only be described as sad moss. This woman was an artist, and her medium was misery. Defeated, I slumped onto my sofa and called my best friend Mark. I put him on speakerphone and vented, pacing back and forth in my living room while Buster watched me with a concerned look. "I don't get it, man. She's a suburban warlord, a despot of drywall," I ranted. "She wants something continuous and opaque." "What am I supposed to build? A miniature border wall? A concrete bunker?" Mark, ever the pragmatist, chuckled on the other end. "Just build it out of mud and twigs, dude. That's earth-toned. Or just give in. Get some of that ugly brown vinyl siding and be done with it." "Never," I declared, a bit too dramatically. "It's the principle of the thing. I will not be ruled by the tyrant of taupe." I was still pacing, mindlessly scrolling through a design blog on my phone, looking for inspiration, for anything to distract me from the beige-colored rage boiling in my veins. I scrolled past minimalist furniture, past brutalist architecture, and then I stopped. I stopped dead in my tracks. On the screen was a photo from a toy convention. It was a life-sized replica of a sports car, built entirely, immaculately, from thousands of tiny, interlocking plastic bricks. Legos. The world seemed to slow down. The gears in my brain, jammed for days with frustration, suddenly lurched into motion with a deafening clank. "Wait a second," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I zoomed in on the photo. The bricks were fitted together so perfectly there were no gaps. It was a solid, continuous surface. It was completely opaque. "Mark, hang on," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Interlocking plastic bricks. They come in a lot of colors, right? Like brown and green and tan?" There was a pause on the line. "Dude, are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" A slow, mischievous, absolutely maniacal grin spread across my face. I walked to the window and looked at the 5 approved colors on the PDF, still displayed on my computer monitor. Sad moss, mocha brown, depressing beige. "It's continuous," I said, the plan forming in my mind, beautiful and terrible in its perfect logic. "It's opaque. And if I use the right combination of colors, it's technically, indisputably, earth-toned." Mark started laughing, a deep, appreciative belly laugh. "Oh my God, you're really going to do it, aren't you?" I looked at Karen's final, dismissive email. "This matter is not open for debate." "There's nothing in the bylaws about the size of the components," I murmured, a giddy, euphoric energy surging through me. "She wants compliance? Oh, I'm going to give her compliance. I'm going to comply so hard it'll make her teeth ache." The war wasn't over. It had just begun. The decision to build a giant Lego wall is one thing. The actual execution is a whole other beast. My initial euphoria quickly gave way to the daunting reality of the task ahead. You can't just go to Target and buy enough Legos to build a 60-foot wall. This was going to require research, logistics, and a level of obsessive planning usually reserved for military invasions and heist movies. My mission, which I had enthusiastically chosen to accept, was codenamed Operation Plastic Fantastic. The first phase was sourcing the material. I spent the next 3 days descending into a rabbit hole of bulk brick-buying forums and international wholesale websites. I learned the difference between ABS and MABS plastic. I learned about clutch power, color consistency, and the fierce online debates between brand purists and off-brand advocates. For my purposes, brand purity was a luxury I couldn't afford. I needed quantity, color accuracy, and a seller who wouldn't ask too many questions when I ordered a literal ton of toy bricks. I found a supplier in South Korea that specialized in architectural modeling bricks, basically Lego clones, and they had my exact HOA-approved colors in stock. Mocha brown, forest green, terracotta red, desert tan, and of course, dreary beige. I spent hours with a calculator and a spreadsheet, figuring out the volume I'd need. 60 feet long, 4 feet high, and 8 inches thick for stability. The final number of bricks was staggering, just over 100,000. I stared at the grand total in my online shopping cart, took a deep breath, and clicked Confirm Purchase. My credit card screamed, but my sense of righteous indignation sang. While I waited for an ocean freighter to transport my pettiness across the Pacific, I moved on to the next phase: structural integrity. I'm a graphic designer, not an engineer. I knew I couldn't just stack these things 4 feet high and hope for the best. I needed a foundation. I needed a professional. This led to one of the most surreal series of phone calls of my life. "Hi, I'm looking to get a quote on a foundation for a new fence." I'd start, nice and normal. "Sure thing. What kind of fence you putting in?" the contractor on the other end would ask. "Well," I'd say, taking a breath, "it's a wall, made of interlocking plastic toy bricks." Click. The first guy hung up on me. The second guy laughed for a solid 30 seconds before asking if my friends had put me up to this. He hung up too. I was starting to lose hope. I needed someone who understood not just construction, but art, vision, the beautiful absurdity of my plan. On my third try, I found him. His company was called Dave's Dependable Concrete and Construction, and his name was, predictably, Dave. Or, as I would come to know him, Big Dave. He was a grizzled, no-nonsense man in his late 50s with a formidable belly and hands the size of dinner plates. He rolled up to my house in a dusty Ford F-250, took one look at my soon-to-be-demolished picket fence, and grunted. I invited him inside and laid my digital blueprints out on the dining room table. He stared at them, his brow furrowed. He looked at the detailed rendering of the multi-toned brick wall, the cross-section showing a concrete footing and steel rebar posts set every 8 feet. He looked at me. He looked back at the blueprints. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You want me to tear out that perfectly good fence, pour a code-compliant concrete footing, drill and set half-inch steel rebar posts, and then you're going to encase them in toy blocks?" "Interlocking plastic bricks," I corrected gently. "And yes, it's for an HOA-compliant project." I slid Karen's letter and the approved color palette across the table. He read the letter, his eyes scanning the legalese. He looked at the swatches of beige and brown. A strange sound escaped his throat, a low, choked cough that turned into a rumbling chuckle, then a full-blown, wheezing laugh. He slapped the table, making the salt shaker jump. "An HOA job," he boomed, wiping a tear from his eye. "Now it all makes sense. I've been doing this for 30 years, kid. I've built houses on cliffs and pools on top of skyscrapers. I once had a lady ask me to build a soundproof panic room for her pet parrot. But this? He pointed a sausage-sized finger at my blueprint. This is art. This is the Mona Lisa of telling somebody to shove it. He looked me right in the eye, a newfound respect dawning in his expression. I'm in. The weirdest job of the decade surcharge will apply, you understand. I understand completely, Dave, I said, shaking his hand. Welcome to the team. A week later, the day arrived. A massive freight truck, the kind that usually delivers things to warehouses and factories, lumbered down our quiet suburban street, its air brakes hissing like an angry dragon. It backed up to my driveway with an ear-splitting beep, beep, beep. My neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to appear on their porches and behind their curtains. I saw Karen's blinds twitch. The driver opened the cargo door, revealing a sight to behold: 4 massive wooden pallets, each one stacked high with cardboard boxes, shrink-wrapped and ominous. It was my ammo. My beautiful, plastic, perfectly compliant ammo. Dave, who had arrived with his crew to start demolishing the picket fence, just shook his head and grinned. He and I stood there in the driveway, side by side, watching as the forklift operator carefully unloaded pallet after pallet of my righteous indignation. You know, kid, Dave said, clapping me on the shoulder with a hand that nearly sent me to my knees. For a guy who designs websites, you've got a real knack for causing trouble. I looked at the mountain of boxes, then at Karen's window, where I could just make out her furious silhouette. Dave, I replied with a grin, the trouble hasn't even started yet. The demolition of the white picket fence felt like a ceremony. Dave's crew made short work of it, pulling up the posts with a satisfying schlorp of earth. It was the point of no return. As the last section was hauled away, I felt a pang of sadness, but it was quickly replaced by the thrill of what was to come. With the old fence gone, Dave's team got to work on the foundation, a clean, sharp trench that outlined the future home of my masterpiece. Karen, as expected, did not wait long. She marched across her perfectly manicured lawn, a clipboard in hand, her face a thunderous mask of suspicion. Mr. Thompson, she barked, stopping just short of my property line, as if an invisible force field were holding her back. What is the meaning of this? You have not submitted your new plan for approval by the Architectural Review Committee. I gave her my most pleasant, unbothered smile. Oh, this is just the foundation, Karen. Standard procedure for any new barrier. Can't be too careful about stability, you know. I gestured vaguely at the mountain of cardboard boxes stacked neatly on my driveway. The final materials are right over there. Fully compliant with Bylaw 7, Section C, Subsection IV, of course. She squinted at the boxes, which were marked only with shipping codes and weight information. The seed of confusion was planted, but she couldn't yet see the tree of absurdity that was about to grow from it. Thwarted for the moment, she made a disapproving harumph sound and marched back to her beige castle. Once the concrete was poured and the rebar posts were set, the real fun began. It was time to build. The first day was slow. I was working with Dave, his 2-person crew, and Mark, who had shown up with a 6-pack and an abundance of sarcastic commentary. We developed a system. Dave's crew would mix and pour sand into the large hollow bricks to give them weight and stability, then pass them to Mark and me. We were the artisans, the master builders, carefully clicking them into place, ensuring each layer was perfectly level, threading them over the rebar posts. The sound was addictive, a satisfying, solid click that echoed down the street. Click, click, click. The first layer was mocha brown, the second, forest green, the third, terracotta red. It was slow, painstaking work. Brick by boring, beautiful brick. By the end of the first day, we only had about 10 feet of wall, 1 foot high. It didn't look like much, but it was enough to get the neighborhood talking. People who usually just gave a polite wave while walking their dogs now slowed down, stopping to stare. "What you building there, Alex?" called Mr. Henderson from 2 houses down. "Just a new fence," I yelled back cheerfully. "HOA compliant." My next-door neighbor, Sarah, a retired art teacher with a mischievous twinkle in her eye, came over with a pitcher of iced tea. She looked at the low, multicolored wall, then at the boxes, then at me. A slow smile spread across her face. "Alex, you magnificent bastard," she said, her voice full of admiration. "Is that what I think it is?" "It's an opaque, continuous, earth-toned barrier, Sarah," I replied with a wink. She laughed, a wonderful, hearty sound. "I've lived next to Karen Swanson for 15 years. This is the greatest thing I have ever seen. Let me know if you need another set of hands." The gossip spread like wildfire. The initial confusion in the neighborhood gave way to a growing sense of shared amusement and fascination. The build became a local event. People would arrange their evening walks to coincide with our quitting time, just to see the progress. Kids would ride by on their bikes, pointing and shouting, "He's building a Lego fort." They weren't wrong. Karen's reaction, meanwhile, was a slow-motion study in escalating horror. On day 2, when the wall reached knee-height, she just drove by slowly in her beige sedan, her face unreadable. On day 3, as we neared waist height and the full, ridiculous pattern of earth-toned stripes became clear, she actually stopped her car in the middle of the street to gawk, her mouth hanging open. I saw her taking photos with her phone, no doubt documenting evidence for my impending doom. On day 4, the first official fine notice appeared in my mailbox. $50. Failure to obtain prior approval for new structure. I taped it to the inside of my front door and labeled it fan mail. By the end of the week, the wall was nearly finished. It was glorious. It was solid. It was, without a doubt, the most beautifully obnoxious thing I had ever had a hand in creating. The neighborhood was on my side. Dave and his crew were having the time of their lives, and the smoldering embers of my indignation had been forged into a 4-foot-high monument to malicious compliance. Karen was silent, but it was the silence of a dormant volcano. I knew the eruption was coming, and I couldn't wait. The final brick. It felt momentous, like the placing of a capstone on a pyramid. It was a single, dreary beige piece. I held it up for a moment, a tiny plastic rectangle that represented the culmination of weeks of planning, expense, and glorious, back-breaking pettiness. Dave, Mark, and Sarah stood beside me, a small crowd of neighbors having gathered at a respectful distance. With a dramatic flourish, I pushed it into place. Click. Silence, then applause. A small but enthusiastic cheer went up from the assembled onlookers. Sarah hugged me. Dave clapped me on the back so hard I think he realigned my spine. We had done it. 60 feet of 4-foot-high, structurally sound, perfectly level, HOA bylaw-adherent masterpiece. It was a mosaic of earth tones that, if you squinted from 100 yards away, almost looked like some kind of weird striped stone. But up close, there was no mistaking it. It was, in all its absurd glory, a giant Lego wall. The celebratory mood lasted for approximately 53 minutes. That's how long it took for Karen to finish formulating her attack. She didn't march this time. She stormed. She came across the lawn like a hurricane in sensible shoes, clutching a binder to her chest as if it were a holy text. "This is a toy!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated fury. She was pointing at the wall, her finger trembling. I had been waiting for this moment. I had rehearsed for it. I adopted a calm, almost zen-like demeanor. Hello, Karen. Nice day, isn't it? I have to disagree with you. It's a barrier constructed from interlocking polymer bricks. They are toys, she repeated, her voice rising in pitch. For children. Well, the box didn't say, ages for 99 for nothing, I quipped. Mark snorted with laughter behind me. Karen's eyes narrowed into slits. Look, Karen, I said, shifting to a more serious tone. Let's go through the checklist, shall we? Is the barrier continuous? I ran my hand along the seamless top. Yes, it is. Is it opaque? I leaned down and peered at it dramatically. Can't see through it, so yes. Is it composed of earth tones? I pulled a small, laminated card from my pocket. It was the approved color palette she had emailed me. I held it up against the wall. I have the color swatches right here. Terracotta, forest green, mocha brown, and 2 lovely shades of beige. It meets every single written requirement in the bylaw you cited. You didn't specify the material, Karen, only its properties. Her face went through a fascinating series of colors, none of which were on the approved palette. She was sputtering, unable to form a coherent sentence. The logic was inescapable, and it was driving her insane. Finally, she landed on her last resort. "I'm calling the police!" she screeched. "You have erected an unauthorized, unsafe, and childish structure. This is a public nuisance." She whipped out her phone and dialed 911. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled up. 2 officers got out. The senior one, whose name tag read Miller, looked at the wall, then at our little group, then at Karen, who was practically vibrating with rage. He had the weary, seen-it-all expression of a man who has responded to far too many suburban disputes. His younger partner, Diaz, was visibly trying to suppress a grin. "What seems to be the problem here, folks?" Officer Miller asked in a tired voice. Karen launched into a frantic, high-pitched tirade about bylaws, property values, aesthetic harmony, and the flagrant misuse of toys. Miller listened patiently, his eyes occasionally flicking over to the wall with a look of dawning comprehension. When she finally paused to take a breath, he turned to me. "So," he said, gesturing with his thumb towards the wall. "Let me get this straight. She sent you a letter saying your old fence wasn't solid enough, so you built a solid wall out of these?" "That's the gist of it, officer," I said calmly. "Just trying to be a law-abiding member of the community and follow the rules as they are written." Officer Miller took a long, slow look at the wall. He walked over to it and knocked on it with his knuckle. It made a dull, solid thud. "It's certainly solid," he conceded. He turned back to Karen, his expression now firm. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is an HOA dispute. It's a civil matter. There is no law against building a fence out of this." He gestured vaguely. "As long as it's on his property line and it's not in immediate danger of falling on someone, it's not a police issue. We can't do anything." "But it's an eyesore!" Karen wailed. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, his patience clearly wearing thin, "taste is not a criminal offense. Have a good day, everyone." He and Diaz got back in their cruiser and drove away, Diaz finally letting out the laugh he'd been holding in. The defeat was total. But the story was just beginning. What I didn't know was that Sarah, my wonderful retired art teacher neighbor, had been filming the entire interaction from her living room window. And she was rather tech-savvy. She posted the video to her Facebook page with the caption, "My neighbor is a legend. This is what happens when you mess with the wrong graphic designer. #HOA wars #malicious compliance." The internet did its thing. Within hours, the video had thousands of views. It was shared on Twitter, on Reddit, on local news forums. By morning, my sleepy suburban street was no longer sleepy. A van from a local news channel was parked across the street. A reporter was doing a stand-up segment with my glorious, idiotic wall as the backdrop. My phone was buzzing non-stop with calls from numbers I didn't recognize and notifications from social media. The headline on the local news website read, "Suburban Spat Goes Viral. Man Battles HOA with 100,000 Lego Bricks." I had wanted to make a point to Karen. I had inadvertently started a movement. The fallout from the viral video was immediate and overwhelming. For 2 days, my life was a blur of interviews, supportive emails from strangers around the world, and the constant, low-level hum of activity on my street. But the real consequence arrived in my mailbox on Tuesday, delivered not by certified mail, but shoved unceremoniously through the slot. It was a notice printed on angry red paper. Emergency meeting of the Harmony Meadows. Homeowners Association. Agenda: urgent review of unapproved structure at 124 Primrose Lane. This was it, the final showdown. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday night at the community clubhouse. The entire neighborhood was buzzing with an energy usually reserved for Super Bowl Sunday. This was our Super Bowl. The Rebels versus the Beige Empire. I knew I couldn't go in unprepared. This was Karen's home turf. I spent the next 2 days assembling my defense. I printed out the relevant bylaws and enlarged Section C, subsection IV, onto a giant foam core board. I printed out dozens of pages of supportive comments from the neighborhood social media page. Sarah, who was now my unofficial campaign manager, helped me prepare a short, concise speech. Mark promised to be there for moral support. I even called a friend from college who is now a lawyer. He laughed for about 10 minutes straight before giving me some solid pro bono advice. Stick to the facts. Stick to the written rules. Don't let her make it about emotion. Thursday night arrived. The clubhouse, a sterile room that usually hosted sad birthday parties and lackluster yoga classes, was packed. It was standing room only. I had never seen more than 10 people at an HOA meeting before. Tonight, there must have been over 100. I saw faces I barely recognized, all drawn by the drama. I took a seat in the front row with Sarah and Mark. Karen and the 2 other board members, a nervous-looking man named Gary, and a woman who looked permanently disappointed, sat at a long table at the front, facing the crowd. Karen banged a gavel. "This emergency meeting of the Harmony Meadows Homeowners Association will now come to order," she announced, her voice tight with suppressed rage. She launched directly into her prosecution, using a PowerPoint presentation she had clearly spent days creating. The first slide was a picture of my beautiful Lego wall with a giant red circle and slash through it. "This monstrosity," she began, her voice dripping with venom, "is a mockery of our community's standards. It is a childish, garish eyesore that is detrimental to our collective property values." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a picture of a smiling family. People move to Harmony Meadows for a reason. They move here for peace, for uniformity, for aesthetic harmony. This thing, she gestured dramatically in the general direction of my house, shatters that harmony. She went on for 10 minutes, showing pictures of tasteful, brown, HOA-approved fences. She talked about the spirit of the law, the intent of the bylaws, and the sanctity of their covenants. It was a masterful performance of self-righteous indignation. When she finished, she looked out at the crowd, expecting, I think, a round of applause. Instead, she was met with an uncomfortable silence. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her eyes locking onto mine, "do you have anything to say in your defense before the board votes on levying the maximum possible fines and compelling the immediate removal of this structure?" This was my moment. I calmly walked to the front of the room. I didn't have a PowerPoint. I just propped my giant foam core printout of the bylaw on an easel. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady. "I'm not going to talk about feelings. I'm not going to talk about the spirit of the law. The HOA is not governed by spirit. It's governed by words. Written words. These words right here. I pointed to the text. Bylaw 7, Section C, subsection IV. It says a fence must be continuous, opaque, and earth-toned. It does not say it must be made of wood. It does not say it must be made of vinyl. It does not say it can't be made of interlocking plastic bricks. My wall follows these words perfectly. To the letter. I paused, letting that sink in. But you know what? This isn't really about a wall. This is about being told that your lawn is a quarter-inch too tall. This is about getting a violation notice because your recycling bin was visible from the street for 2 hours too long. This is about a board that has forgotten that it works for us, the homeowners, not the other way around. A murmur went through the crowd. I had struck a nerve. Before Karen could bang her gavel, Sarah stood up. I, for one, think the wall is fantastic, she declared. It shows creativity, and frankly, it's brought more positive attention to this neighborhood than anything the board has done in years. I live next to it, and my property value feels pretty darn harmonious. Suddenly, another hand went up. It was Mr. Henderson. Karen, last year you fined me because my basketball hoop was a shade of orange you didn't approve of. A basketball hoop. I think Alex has a point. One by one, other homeowners started speaking up. A floodgate of frustration had opened. Stories of petty fines, of condescending letters, of absurd demands poured out. Karen's face went from angry to shocked to pale. She was losing control and she knew it. Finally, Sarah raised her voice above the din. I move that the board formally accept Alex's wall as compliant with all existing bylaws. Seconded, yelled a man in the back. Karen, flustered, had no choice. All in favor of deeming the structure at 124 Primrose Lane compliant? A forest of hands went up. It was almost unanimous. All opposed? Karen, Gary, and the disappointed woman raised their hands. 3 lonely hands in a sea of triumphant faces. The motion passed. A cheer erupted in the room. But Sarah wasn't done. And I would like to make another motion, she announced, her voice ringing with confidence. I move for a vote of no confidence in Karen Swanson as HOA president. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, and then the chaos erupted anew. The vote was a landslide. The Queen had been deposed. The weeks following the great HOA showdown were strangely peaceful. Karen Swanson didn't just lose the presidency, she seemed to vanish. Her house went up for sale less than a month later, sold to a young family with 2 kids who were absolutely mesmerized by my wall. The reign of beige was over. A new, far more reasonable HOA board was elected in a special election. Sarah, unsurprisingly, was voted in as the new president. Her first official act was to draft a letter on behalf of the entire association, formally rescinding all my fines and apologizing for the overzealous enforcement of aesthetic standards. I framed it and hung it in my office. The wall, my beautiful, ridiculous wall, stayed. It became something of a local landmark. The news story had given it a life of its own. On weekends, it wasn't uncommon to see a car slow down as it passed my house, its occupants pointing and taking pictures. A few times I came outside to find that local kids had added their own single Lego bricks to the base of the wall, like tiny offerings at the foot of a monument. It wasn't a nuisance, it was a destination. My life settled back into its comfortable rhythm. The coffee maker still whirred in the morning, the joggers still thumped past my house, and Buster still dreamed his squirrel-chasing dreams. But something was different. The quiet felt earned now, fought for. My little slice of suburbia felt more like a community, bonded by a shared story and a collective victory over the absurd. One perfect Saturday afternoon, I was sitting on my front porch, watching the light play across the multicolored plastic bricks. Buster was snoozing at my feet, his head resting on my shoes. I never set out to be a rebel. I'm just a guy who wanted a nice fence for his dog. But in fighting for that simple thing, I'd discovered something about myself and about my neighbors. I learned that sometimes you have to fight for your right to be a little bit different, and that creativity can be the most powerful weapon against mindless conformity. Buster stirred, lifting his head. He looked at me, then at the wall, and let out a soft woof before wagging his tail. I think he got it. He understood. Good fences make good neighbors, but sometimes an absolutely legendary fence. One built of defiance, creativity, and 100,000 little plastic bricks makes them even better.